Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video. I know this video is a bit of a surprise, but I'm actually really glad that I'm able to do it, and I hope you guys enjoy it. 2020 has already started off with a bang, I'll put it that way, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to do this video talking a little bit about a book that just came out last week called Root Magic by Eden Royce, who is a Black American. She is a Gullah Geechee writer, and this book is written from that perspective. I feel like in our current sort of cultural and socio-political climate, reading a book like this, Root Magic, here it is. You guys can see all my green little flags because previously I would have folded down the pages, but I'm trying to break that bad habit. But knowing that a book like this was coming out and is now out, and being able to read this advanced copy really meant a lot to me. I think this would be considered like a children's book or a young adult book. It's about this 11-year-old girl named Jez, and this is her twin brother, Jay. So I would say, YA. I read YA. I know some adults don't like to read YA, but this book is even appropriate for like younger children. The main characters are 11 years old in the book, so I would say that this is actually a really good book for like maybe the 9 to 14 age range. There's like not a whole lot of cussing or anything like that in the book. I'm not going to do a like spoiler type of review of this book, but I'm going to read you guys the blurb, and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the plot and tell you just what I thought about this book. I really loved it. I enjoyed it a lot. So debut author Eden Royce arrives with a wondrous story of love, bravery, friendship, and family, filled to the brim with magic great and small. It's 1963 and things are changing for Jez Turner, but the biggest change comes when Jez and her twin brother, Jay, turn 11 and their uncle tells them he's going to train them in root work, African-American folk magic that has been the legacy of their family for generations. And it's not a moment too soon, because when evil, both natural and supernatural, comes to show itself in town, it's going to take every bit of the magic Jez has to see her through. I love that. To me, this almost seems, so this is written, I believe, as a standalone novel. But for me, this almost seemed like the first novel of what could be like a book series about this girl, Jez, and also her and her twin brother learning about root magic. So the book opens with a funeral. I'm not going to tell you whose funeral it is, but the book opens with a funeral, and we immediately, the very first words of the book, like we immediately get this feeling of the culture. The very first sentence of the book: when Gullah people die, babies in the family get passed over the coffin so the dead person won't come back from the beyond to take them away. No one did that today with me and my twin brother Jay, of course. We were about to turn 11 years old, and that was too old to get passed over the coffin. So, and isn't that just some beautiful prose? I'm going to read you guys a little bit more of some of my favorite lines, because the writing of this book is just gorgeous. From the very first page, we're really immersed in this world of this Gullah family that's living in South Carolina in 1963. These twins are approaching their 11th birthday, and as you guys heard, it does open with the funeral. And shortly after that, they learn that in order to protect themselves and to protect the family, and now that they're 11, it seems like 11 in a lot of ways is kind of this seminal age. I feel like in literature, and especially in YA novels, 11 is really that age. Like 11 seems like it's the seminal age where you're sort of really starting to feel those growing pains. You're really starting to feel those pangs of growing up, and then 12, which is like your last year before, your last preteen year before you kind of hit 13. And I know for a lot of children, it seems like everything's going to change around those ages. So I really, I have a little bit of tape here. So I really appreciated that it was that age range, and they learn that, they're turning 11 now. They're finally getting a little bit older. They're able to have a little bit more responsibility, and they're finally old enough to begin learning about root magic and to begin learning about the root work that's been sort of handed down as a cultural legacy in their family. And that their family is one of the root working families on an island of South Carolina, which is where this is set, on a Gullah island in South Carolina. And everyone in their, little town comes to them for oh, give me a little graveyard dust, a little brick dust, or give me a potion for luck or a potion for love or this, that, and the third. And so up until sort of the beginning of this book, the kids just think that it's practical magic, like, oh, ginger for stomach aches and, things of that nature. But in this book, they kind of learn, they pull back the veil, and they learn that the magic that their family does actually is real, that there's like an element of reality to it in their real world. And they start becoming opened up to all manner of, supernatural apparitions, spirits, ghosts, boo-hags, haints pop up in here. And when I got to the part about boo-hags in here, I just was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not Gullah, but my family is from North Carolina, and there's like a lot of lore in my family about boo-hags, which you guys have heard me talk about before. And this is the first time that I ever saw a book that wasn't, Virginia Hamilton from when I was a child in the 90s. This is the first time I've seen a contemporary fiction work that says, like, and this is what you do when the boo-hag comes, and this is why you paint your house Haint blue, which I will include some links in the description box, because I actually just read a really great piece on the color Haint blue, and this is why this is a protective color, and this is what you do to protect yourself. And not only are there, so this book gave me a lot of like Lovecraft Country. I have not read the book Lovecraft Country. I know it's by a white man. But this book gave me Lovecraft Country vibes, if Lovecraft Country maybe was actually written by a Black American woman, because there's also a lot of mixing of the supernatural along with the natural. There's it is 1963, so it's the early days of integration, which this family is a little bit nervous about, is afraid about. I liked that portrayal as well. It's not just seen as like, oh, we're going to just integrate and everything's going to be wonderful, and this is going to be our ticket out. And there's actually a lot of discussion in this book about a lot of concepts, but about the concept of, is it better for us to, be ourselves, be amongst our own culture, or is it better for us to leave our culture behind and assimilate? The main character, Jez, is really cruelly and mercilessly teased by some girls in her class for being a root worker. And and the girl in her class that's teasing her is like also Gullah, but her family has left those ways behind, and they tease her as calling her country, as calling her backwards, she calls her a witch baby, she throws water on her. She really teases her and bullies her, and Jez is really struggling with trying to understand why she's doing it. And something that's told to her by some of her family members is like, there are some, the phrase all skin folk ain't kinfolk is actually written in this book, which I appreciated. But basically she says, like, not everyone that looks like you, not every Negro or, not everyone that looks like you is going to want to support you. Not everyone that looks like you is going to understand you. You have to understand yourself. You have to take pride in yourself and your own culture and your own heritage and your own identity. And, you have to also understand that they get into some of the divide between like rural and urban, the South and the North, the idea that a lot of Black people had at this time in the early 60s of, almost like that the South is our old country, right? And like we need to leave the old country and we need to leave the old ways behind, and we have to sort of step into the new day and the new era, and we got to like leave them backwards ways, like roots not real, and like our folklore and our culture and all these things. This is stuff that we have to leave behind so that we can like assimilate into whiteness. As I said, it's like the early stages of integration in this book, and these characters are not quite sure how they feel about it. And I felt like that was a very honest portrayal that I don't know if I've ever read, again, in a book before. While reading this book, I really felt like there was a lot of stuff in here I never saw on the page, and I know was there because this author, Eden Royce, is a Black American woman, Once the kids start having their root work lessons, they do open themselves up to the spirit world, and they begin weathering some supernatural attacks. And there are a few scary parts in this book. That's the only thing I would say. Like, I don't think this book might have some parts that are a little frightening for a kid that's maybe under 9 or 10, or an adult that doesn't like horror, because there are some parts that are like a little bit scary that do deal with some of the concepts of possession, some of the concepts of, having ghosts and spirits come to you, and dolls moving on their own and things like that. You guys know how I feel about that. Toys and dolls moving on their own terrifies me. But there are some scary parts in the book. them dealing with supernatural attacks as well as them dealing with the forces of racism. They get a new sheriff in town. There's a new sheriff in town who's actually like considered a white progressive, because one of the other sort of subplots about the forced integration of that time period is that they kind of start forcing them to get some new teachers and to get some new police officers. And so sort of everything is changing. Everything's changing in the town. Everything's changing with our main character, this little girl, Jez. Again, she's growing older. There are some subplots about like her and her twin brother getting older and sort of growing apart, and some of her fears about that, you know, them starting to keep secrets from each other. And while they're dealing with all of this, they're also dealing with this new sheriff who's come into town who's like more of a white progressive. He was brought in specifically for that reason. And the white deputies who are racist sort of rebelling against him and just getting more aggressive with the black residents of this town. They're visited by the police several times in this book, but that's not the main driving force of the book, however. Like, the racism and like the police and all that stuff, that's mostly used as like a more of a catalyst for how they feel like they need to learn more root magic, so they're going to be able to protect themselves and to protect the house and to protect the family. So I really like that she didn't kind of try to like shy away from some of the realities of the time period, but that was not made the focal point of this book. The focal point of this book is the family, the brother and the sister, the mother, the uncle, the grandmother, the father, and their culture, right? Some of the other themes are about growing up, about self-identity. There's a lot in here about black agriculture, land sovereignty, and ownership of the land. Because this family, the Turner family, which they say repeatedly throughout this book, like, we're Turners, we don't run from nothing. We're not going to be ran out of here. Like, we're going to do what we got to do. They own the land that they live on. They live at the edge of a marsh, and they own the land. They grow their own food. They have chickens. They have eggs. They previously had pigs. They grow corn, and they feed and provide for themselves by living off of that land. And this is actually a hallmark of the Gullah people. This was a culture that basically evolved out of the South Carolina Sea Islands, where the slaves down there were basically abandoned. You guys have heard me talk about this before. I've done a Hidden Figures on some of the, you know, kind of members of the Gullah tribe that have talked about this, which I'll include a link in the description box as well. But they were basically isolated, and they were granted ownership of the land by the government and kind of allowed to just, you know, do whatever they wanted, almost like a grand Negro experiment. And we got this really rich, unique culture that sort of came out of it that, again, is really rooted in folklore, in root work. They have their own language, the Gullah language, which is very, 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 very liberally sprinkled in this book, even just, you know, starting in some of the opening pages. Page 8. We have Jay and Jez talking. "Oh, did you hear Doc and Mama say root?" he asked. I nodded. I couldn't tell what all they were discussing, though. "Me neither," Jay said. "Heist tail, y'all." H-I-C-E-T-A-I-L. "Heist tail, y'all," Mama called over her shoulder as she and Doc picked up the pace. I knew what that meant. It was Gullah for hurry up. There's so much Gullah in here. There's so much Sea Island. There's so much, you know, the food that they eat. Rows and rows of fat red and orange tomatoes hung on our vines. There were lots of green snap peas, stalks of yellow sweet corn, Sea Island red peas, crookneck squash, and purple okra that looked like fingers reaching for the sky. Just last week, we helped Mama plant collard and mustard green seeds and sweet potatoes to harvest later in the fall and into winter. We had eggs from our mini chickens all year round, and there was even a fig tree. Sometimes, Mama had me and Jay pick figs for her to make into jam and sell. Along with rice and seafood from the marsh and ocean around us, the crops we grew and the eggs we collected were what we ate, and also what Mama sold to support us at her stand. Like, we're just really immersed in their world, you know? We're immersed in the marsh. We're immersed in their house. We're immersed in this magic and this, like, supernatural world, but it's through this very particular, you know, experience of this little black Gullah girl, you know, which is a perspective that we just don't see enough. And again, like, her growing pains and her fears. She's a very smart little girl. She's gotten skipped ahead of a grade. So for the first time in her life, now her and her brother are not in the same grade. I believe she's in 6th grade and he's in 5th grade. And so she's around these older girls, and the girls start teasing her because everybody on the island knows that her family is like a root family. So she's trying to, keep up with her schoolwork, and she's trying to make new friends. And she does end up making a best friend, which was really nice to see this relationship, developing between her and her friend. She gets a new teacher, also as a part of this integration program, but the new teacher is actually a Black teacher. And in her new class, the Black teacher reads them, the words of Duke Ellington and all of these Black authors and poets, things that she never really thought about before. And as she's learning all of this stuff, but as she's also seeing, the racism and feeling, the winds of change kind of sweeping through with her getting older and also becoming open to magic and learning more about herself and her history, her heritage, her culture, and her family. We just see this little girl really grow and blossom over the course of this book. Something her new teacher even tells her at one point is our stories matter too much to let someone else tell them. So there's really a reinforcement of our culture is important. Our stories are important. Our history is important. We have magic. You guys know in some of my older previous videos on, Black culture, on my video, What is Black Culture?, where I was talking about, Michael B. Jordan and some of the things that he said about us not having lore. Someone left a comment on that saying well, we don't have our own magic, like how, other people have magic within their culture. And I was like, we do. We have all different types of folklore. We have all different types of superstitions. We have all different types of magic. And when we think of magic and these kids' magic books, it's all filtered through a very specific type of idea. And I would love if this got turned into a series. I think this is just a wonderful message to be aimed at young Black American kids, and especially young Black American little girls. And I found this book to be really, really wonderful. One more thing I wanted to mention is that this book is written extremely well. As you guys just heard, I read you some of the prose. I also really enjoyed the dialogue, very authentic. I love the way that the brother and sister interacted with each other and talked to each other. I feel like a lot of contemporary media makes the kids too mature, which you guys have heard me say about stuff like Stranger Things. Why are they so mature and cursing each other out and fighting? And not to say that the kids in Root Magic don't fight, because they definitely fucking fight more than once, like brothers and sisters do. But I felt like they were allowed to be children. There are several scenes of them running through the South Carolina marsh that they live on and playing and going crabbing. And, there's another scene where Eden Royce writes something like, I waded out into the marsh and I saw the bubbles, which was a telltale sign of the crabs burrowing underneath. And I've been crabbing my whole life, growing up in DC. My aunt has lived in Baltimore my whole life. She had a boat, drive out there, go crabbing, and then eat the crabs on newspaper. It's just these cultural quirks and identifiers that I loved seeing a lot of, and I just loved a lot of the inversions and inversions of stereotypes and tropes that I also saw a lot of in this book. Even this cover, I'm not going to tell you guys too much about it, but even this cover, when you're originally looking at this cover, they're clearly they're in the swamp, they're in the marsh, and you see this Black figure behind them. But if you look a little bit closer, this Black, I don't know if you guys can really tell, but this Black figure is actually filled with stars. They have several conversations with family members where they say things Black isn't ugly, Black isn't scary, dark isn't evil. There's no reason to see this type of dark, shadowy figure and automatically assume that it's an evil figure or it's a malevolent presence, right? The way that we've been conditioned. And there's a lot of that type of inversion in this book. There are a lot of plot twists in this book. There are a lot of things that you think they're going to go one way and they end up going the other way. And you guys know me, I normally feel like I can predict everything, but there were a lot of things that happened in this book that had me oh, I didn't think that was going to happen. That's cool. And the writing was great. The writing was excellent. It was paced really well. It was an easy read, a very enjoyable read. This is even something that I would this is a beach read, something I would just sit back and read. And these green flags represent all the parts of the book that I like. So, I like the book. So a few other individual scenes that I've written down. At one point, she's being bullied and she gets sent home early because this girl dumps water all over her. And when she goes home and she's talking about what happens, she gets told, all kinfolk And this was notes that I wrote. And some people will try to beat you down to make themselves feel big, especially as a Black person and a Black American who's trying to hold onto and remember and honor culture and our history, you know, that other Black people might feel is backwards or shameful or embarrassing, like slavery, like root work. And I wrote here in my notes, I wrote like, this is a good, solid message here of, you know, learn your Black history and be proud of it. And I think that's a great message for kids. I think this is a great book for like preteens and like early teens that are like really into reading. Really about, you know, embracing who you are and understanding who you are and accepting who you are and using that as a power and as a strength to empower yourself and for you to protect yourself and your loved ones. I also felt like the main character, Jez, just had a good spirit about her. I felt like she was curious, she was smart, she was bright, she was inventive, but she was still allowed to be a kid. Like I said, we still got scenes of her and her brother, you know, running, playing, fighting, but, you know, not being too mature. There's some conversations that she has with her mom and her uncle where, you know, I still see that kind of like immaturity of that 11-year-old. It didn't feel like an adult, you know, trying to give me an idea of what a kid is like. It's just one of the first books I've read in a long time that just like really felt good and authentic while I was reading it. And a bit more prose that I wanted to read to you guys from my notes before I go. I wrote another note. Culture is so rich in this book with the description of cultural traditions. On page 304, it was about a cemetery. And she wrote, people mostly didn't come here unless it was a new grave or a holiday like Christmas, when the graves get fresh poinsettias, or Easter. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how my mom pronounces it, poinsettias. Or Easter, when they would get white lilies. Like, number one, isn't that just the most beautiful description of a cemetery that you've ever heard? Like, very poignant, descriptive writing, great scene setting, great dialogue. She uses a lot of dialogue to tell us about all these individual characters and their, you know, personalities. But even like in that, I was just like, even in that one sentence, like she told us so much. Like, on Christmas, people come to the graves and they leave poinsettias. On Easter, they come and they leave, you know, white lilies. That's a cultural thing, you know? I also wrote, I love that their dialogue, especially the Gullah parts, are written in dialect. They're written in like an italicized dialect. They're not written in like proper English, the King's English, which is also a phrase that's even used in this book. Like, we didn't even speak the King's English. We only spoke Gullah, you know. It was very Zora Neale Hurston. It was very like, this is our dialect. This is our language. This is how we talk. This is who we are. It was the same with the description of the superstitions. You guys know I'm very superstitious. My mother's very superstitious. I was raised very, you know, into superstitions and lore, and that's my jam. And I love the description of the superstitions. After they were leaving the cemetery, Doc said a prayer and instructed us to walk backwards out of the graveyard because we didn't want to bring any Haints home with us. Superstition, you know, hold your breath while you're going past the graveyard. You cross your fingers, you know, just, again, more things that I never really saw represented in a book. There's a wonderful description on page 306 of their chores. Jay went to feed the chickens and get a few eggs. Doc went to dig the vegetables out of the ground. Sweet potatoes, mustard greens, onions. He even pulled up a few of our peanut plants so we could boil them for a snack later. That for me was like a little trigger, like boiled peanuts. I knew how to make a cornbread and I got to doing that so Mama wouldn't have to. The batter was all mixed up and in the iron skillet when Mama came in, her eyes looking red and tired. Without a word, she washed her hands in the sink, then took the skillet from me and put it in the oven and set the little white kitchen timer next to the stove. Then she collapsed onto a chair and sat there, looking at me and at Jay across the table. What is it? I asked, not able to help myself any longer. She looked back at us and smiled, the biggest one I'd seen on her in a long while. Sometimes, Mama said, a little talk made things all right. Just beautiful, 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 beautiful prose. And this whole book is just full of some gorgeous, lovely writing. Again, this is Eden Royce's first novel. I would love if this became a series. I would love if she wrote more books. I'll buy every book. I'll buy every book you write, girl. Obviously I didn't buy this one. This is an advanced reader copy that was sent to me for this reason. So again, thank you so much, Harper Collins, for sending me this. This is a Walden Pond Press book, which is an imprint of Harper Collins children's publisher. So I just want to thank them so much for sending me this again. But again, like I just love the descriptions, the waking up, the doing the chores, the preparing the food, taking care of the chickens, weaving the baskets, going crabbing, playing in the marsh. Really vivid portrayal of their lives in the Gullah culture, depictions of our magic, our cultural cues, things that we're going through in a really brilliant and wonderful way. So, Root Magic, Eden Royce. Loved this book. I will include a link in the description box for anyone that wants to check it out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know that there's a lot going on right now, and I really do think that this is like a great book for maybe someone that's looking for something to read right now. That's not, related to everything that's going on. That's like maybe a little bit of an escape. And don't we need more books like that? So, Root Magic by Eden Royce. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Food for thought as always. You can let me know what you think in the comments. See you guys next time.